Under the brilliance of chandeliers and the clinking of glasses, a man believed he had conquered the world, yet he lost the taste of his own life. His restaurant was perfect, his name respected, his fortune immeasurable. Still, something within him was decaying in silence. Until the day he heard a simple phrase, spoken by an ordinary person, which stripped away the veneer of success and made him realize that the deepest hunger cannot be satisfied with luxury, but with truth. Hello, my friends. I am Linda, and this is the Linda's Stories channel. I hope you enjoy this story. At the beginning, Edward's restaurant was a golden dream that glimmered in every reflection of the crystal glasses. A work of art in haute cuisine, mirrors on the walls, chandeliers like cascades of light, impeccably aligned tables, clients wearing designer clothes and rehearsed smiles. He created it to be his legacy, a tribute to his father, who had spent his life cooking in a small roadside trailer. But time and money had turned the purpose into a spectacle of appearances. Reservations were fully booked months in advance. The crowd didn't come for the food, but for the photographs, for the posts, the appearances in magazines. Edward, who had started washing dishes alongside his father, was now a name whispered among millionaires and influencers. However, the more his fame grew, the further he drifted from the essence that had driven him. Edward woke up every morning in his penthouse downtown, watching through the enormous windows the hustle and bustle of the people below. Tiny dots rushing around, so different from him. At 45, he had achieved everything money could buy. Homes on 3 continents, cars that cost as much as small apartments, watches that could support families for months. While sipping his imported coffee, he remembered his father, Sebastian, waking up at 4 in the morning to prepare the broths and pasta for the day. The smell of garlic and onions sautéed would cling to his school clothes, which earned Edward many taunts as a child. But his father always said with a tired smile, "That smell, son, is the smell of dignity. It's what honest sweat looks like." Edward hadn't touched a pan in years. His kitchen was dominated by an award-winning chef, an artist of complex flavors and lavish presentations. Everything on the menu seemed designed to impress, but rarely to comfort. Still, the profit was enormous, and the pride even greater. The restaurant Langston's occupied a restored historic building with a vaulted ceiling and floor-to-ceiling windows. The waiting list reached 3 months for a regular dinner, 6 for special dates. Edward only visited the place for specific events or to accompany celebrities who insisted on his presence for the photos. He had turned into a brand, not a cook. Chef Antoine Belmont, thrice internationally awarded, commanded the kitchen with military discipline. His dishes were works of art: foie gras with red fruit reduction, scallops adorned with edible flowers, desserts that looked like sculptures too delicate to be eaten. Nothing there resembled the meals Sebastian sold from his food truck. One night, during one of the gala parties held in the main hall, Edward watched from a reserved box the couples who laughed without really smiling. The wine was expensive, the setting perfect, but something there felt empty. A waiter, not realizing who Edward was, said to him, "They always leave like this, sir. Beautiful, but hungry." That was when Edward realized he no longer knew the taste of his own food. That phrase haunted him all week. As he took calls from investors and assessed proposals to expand the brand internationally, something inside him felt restless. A nameless longing, a hunger that none of the award-winning dishes could satisfy. On Friday, after dismissing his personal assistant, Edward did something he hadn't done in nearly a decade. He drove alone to the restaurant, parked in the back, and entered through the service door. He carried a backpack with simple clothes, faded jeans, a plain white t-shirt, a worn-out cap, and a pair of ordinary sneakers. In the employee bathroom, he swapped his Italian suit for that improvised disguise. The reflection in the mirror surprised him. Without the perfect haircut, without the luxury watch, without the studied posture, he looked normal, almost invisible. The kind of man who would go unnoticed anywhere, even in his own restaurant. The following week he wore a simple apron and the cap, disguising himself as one of the newly hired cooks. The staff didn't recognize him. He seldom appeared outside official events. He wanted to experience once again the smell, the heat, the truth of the place he claimed to love. During the shift, the sound of pots and the steam from the boilers seemed to return something lost to him. It was like going back to the old trailer where his father taught him to chop onions and share stories about humility. There, among pots and broths, he felt a longing that pierced him like a knife. His hands, once soft and cared for, were now red from the hot water. He had been assigned to the basic prep section, chopping vegetables, sorting ingredients, keeping the workstations tidy. The team treated him with the indifference reserved for newcomers, occasionally correcting his technique or pointing out the correct place for each utensil. Edward had become Eddie, a middle-aged man trying to start anew in the kitchen. No one questioned much about his past, and he offered only vague snippets. He had worked in smaller restaurants, needed a fresh start, admired Langston's for years. Half-truths that built a believable character. It was when he heard her. The new waitress, Grace Miller, was young, with a calm expression and eyes that seemed to read the world. She was near the sink, collecting dishes, when a colleague asked why she was sad. Grace replied, not knowing Edward was listening. "They leave empty." 3 words, simple, direct, cruel. They echoed within him for days. They leave empty. She wasn't talking about physical hunger, but something deeper. The emptiness of a soulless dinner, of a dish that said nothing but, "Look at me." Grace had translated, in 3 silent syllables, everything that success had erased. In the days that followed, Edward watched Grace with renewed attention. She was in her early 20s, had brown hair tied in a simple bun, and a gentle way of moving between the tables. Unlike the other waiters trained to be almost invisible, she talked with the customers, asked about their day, and sincerely smiled when serving the dishes. On a particularly busy night, Edward saw her comforting an elderly lady dining alone. Grace sat for a few minutes at her table, listening to stories about a wedding anniversary that the woman was now celebrating without her husband. When the manager approached to reprimand her, Grace simply nodded, discreetly stood up, and minutes later returned with a small lit candle on a dessert plate, offered on the house. The lady cried, thanked her, and when she left, hugged Grace as if she were an old friend. Later, Edward heard the manager criticizing her. "We are not here to make friends. We are here to serve efficiently and maintain the standard." Grace only replied in a calm voice, "But aren't we here to nurture too?" That night, Edward went home and looked at an old photo. Him, still a boy, next to his father, holding a poorly shaped coccinha. It was the snack they sold together, the food that supported the difficult years. His father used to say that good food was the one that reminded you of love, not luxury. Edward cried for the first time in a long while. In the following weeks he continued his disguise, gradually getting closer to Grace. Grace worked in the restaurant to pay the bills, but her dream was to write books that nourish people's souls. "Stories are like meals," she explained one day as they waited for the service elevator. "Some are beautiful, they impress, but you forget them soon after. Others are simple but stay with you forever, like the taste of the cake your grandmother used to make." Edward began to understand that the problem wasn't just the food in his restaurant, it was everything he had become. The transformation began the next day. Firing the renowned chef was the first step, and also the one most commented on by the media. Critics called him crazy, arrogant, suicidal. The investors pulled back. Then he had the crystal chandeliers removed, replaced the glasses with simple cups, and swapped out the tablecloths for raw wooden tables. The walls were adorned with old photos of cooks, mothers, grandmothers, farmers. At the centre of the new menu, only one item, Edward's coccinha, made with shredded chicken, homemade vegetable broth, and a pinch of nutmeg, just like his father used to make. The wealthiest clients disappeared in the first week. Influencers cancelled their reservations. The hall, once filled with flashes, became silent. Grace remained. When Edward finally revealed his identity to the remaining staff, there was shock, outrage, even feelings of betrayal. But Grace just smiled and said, "I suspected there was something different about you. No one looks at a restaurant the way you did, as if you were searching for something lost." She was the only one who understood what was happening. Edward, still disguised as a cook, watched her serve each dish with a shy but genuine smile. He saw something in her that resembled his father, the ability to care through simplicity. But the following months were tough. Profits plummeted. He had to sell shares, reduce the number of employees and mortgage part of the properties. Friends advised him to give up, to go back to what made money. But Edward couldn't. There was something in it, a kind of faith that prevented him from retreating. In his luxurious apartment, he began to notice the emptiness of the spaces, the silence of the rooms that never received true friends. He sold the penthouse and moved to a modest apartment above the restaurant, as his father did in the trailer. Sleepless nights were replaced by the good fatigue of someone who works with their hands. Sometimes, Grace could be seen talking with the few customers, telling stories about her childhood, asking about their parents, about what they like to eat at home. And when they ate the meal, something changed in their faces. A subtle glow, a restrained emotion. An old man cried while remembering his mother. A woman took 10 meals for her children. A child asked to hug the cook. Edward realized that although the restaurant was empty, his heart had never been so full. 2 years passed. The restaurant, now small and discreet, was maintained with difficulty, the bills barely balanced. Grace had become the manager, and together they shared the fear and hope of each month. Edward had sold 2 of his 3 luxury cars, his watch collection, and even his country house to keep the restaurant running. One night, after closing the register with just enough to pay the suppliers, Grace and Edward sat in the empty kitchen. She had brought a small homemade cake to celebrate the 2nd anniversary of the restaurant's transformation. "Why do you keep going, Edward?" she asked as they shared the simple cake. "You could be a millionaire again tomorrow if you wanted to." He smiled, thoughtful. "Because now they leave full." One morning, a letter arrived, an invitation for a special review from one of the world's most prestigious culinary magazines. The name of the critic was Margaret Lee, known for destroying reputations with a few words. Edward almost gave up. But Grace convinced him to accept. "It doesn't matter what she writes," Grace said, adjusting his apron. "What matters is how you feel when someone tastes what you make." That night, Margaret entered alone, unannounced. She sat at a corner table, ordered the single dish, and watched the activity. The restaurant had only 5 tables occupied. The smell of the hot broth gently filled the air. Edward cooked with his own hands using the exact recipe his father used to make. When the critic took the first bite, he closed his eyes, expecting the worst. She ate in silence, slowly, with a serene face. When she finished, she stood up, walked to the counter, and shook his hand. She said nothing. She just smiled, with tears in her eyes. 3 days later, the review was published. "The restaurant that serves memories. There is no luxury, no spectacle. There is something infinitely rarer. Truth." The text went viral. People started to return, but now they came with a different perspective. They came in search of a flavor that touched the soul. They came to remember, not to show off. Edward refused to expand, refused franchises, refused investors. He kept the restaurant the same size with the same menu. On one wall he had some words engraved in wood that changed everything. "Here, people don't leave empty." Over time he revealed to Grace who he really was. She cried, confused, but smiled when she understood that she had been part of something much bigger than just a simple restaurant. She became his partner. And together they began teaching young cooks from humble families, showing that cooking was, above all, an act of love. One afternoon, while they were organizing ingredients for the following day, Edward watched Grace teach a teenager how to debone chicken for a recipe. There was a softness in her gestures, a genuine patience that reminded him of how his father had taught him. "You resemble him sometimes," Edward said. Who? Asked Grace without taking her eyes off the work. With my father. He had the same way of teaching, as if he was sharing not just a technique but a part of himself. Grace smiled, adjusting the young apprentice's hands on the knife. That's what food is, isn't it? A piece of who we are that we give to others. At that moment, Edward understood that the emptiness he had felt for so many years was not just the absence of his father or the kitchen, but the absence of purpose, of meaning. One afternoon, Edward visited the old piece of land where his father's trailer used to be. The grass had grown, and the wind carried the distant smell of wet earth. He sat on the ground and placed a coxina beside the small wooden cross that marked his father's grave. He closed his eyes and gave thanks. That simple man who cooked to support his son would never have imagined that his hands had planted a seed that would withstand time, pride, and vanity. Edward finally understood that success was not about having the most expensive restaurant, but about serving something that made someone remember who they are. Years later, when asked what the secret of Edward's coxinha was, he would calmly reply, "It is made of memories, of love that withstood money, of truth that survived the shine of appearances." And then people understood. True wealth was never in the gold of the goblets, but in the silent warmth of a simple dish that makes us feel at home, even if it's the first time we've tasted it. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.